Today on the Wrestling Roundtable, the year in review 2009 and the decade in review from 2000 to 2009 as well, for pro wrestling and mixed martial arts. Welcome to the Wrestling Roundtable. I'm your host, Eric Santamaria. Sitting to my left, which is your right, is Chris Harris, video and audio engineer. And to my right, which is your left, Shane Hagadorn, professional wrestler of nearly 6 years. Rodney LeConte, videographer and director of the Grappling Kings. And of course, we want to remind you to join us on WrestlingRoundtable.com. You're either watching us there on YouTube, on iTunes, or our new home of Go Fight Live. We want to thank the guys at Go Fight Live for hosting us there as well. It's a great hub for boxing, now professional wrestling with Ring of Honor, and mixed martial arts. And mixed martial arts is what we're going to start off talking about, because we're going to do the year in review for 2009 for pro wrestling, later on mixed martial arts now. And talking about some of the bigger stories of 2009, I think the big one, of course, is the big show, UFC 100 in Las Vegas. 100, the milestone show won by Brock Lesnar, the big crossover star from Pro Wrestling Unified, the heavyweight titles with Frank Mir as his opponent. And of course, it was a good card aside from that. A lot of people were saying afterwards it might be the height of mixed martial arts. This is as big as it's going to go. Do you think it's going to get bigger? Do you think it's going to plateau? Where do you think mixed martial arts goes from here?
For right now, it can only get bigger. Between UFC, WEC, now they're finally taking advantage of the Pride library with the Best of Pride that just started. Strikeforce is growing. Mixed martial arts as a whole can only get bigger from here on out.
As far as UFC 100 goes, yeah, I mean, maybe it's their biggest show to date, but they still haven't hit New York City yet. They still haven't done their shows in Boston. They're going to Toronto. They could only get bigger. They still haven't done their network deals. Dana White have said it time and time again. The show is only going to keep rising, and I can't wait to see what happens for them.
I think it's going to keep rising, but unfortunately, it looks like they've hit a speed bump with 4 of the champions hurt right now.
Well, speaking of their champions, they do have a pretty strong lineup of champions. People are saying that it looks like every champion in the division, Brock Lesnar, of course, is up in the air, but aside from him, they're strong champions. Machida looked a little weak in the last fight with Shogun. Well, maybe not weak, but beatable. Whereas BJ Penn, Anderson Silva, GSP are tearing through their opponents and making them look like scrubs in comparison. Is that a really good thing for UFC, or are people bored with the same people always winning?
It's a good thing and it's a bad thing. The bad part of it is you only have St. Pierre and Silva defending their belt, twice for GSP this and once for Silva. I don't know if you need a deeper talent pool for that weight class or if just they feel they're so much above. But being that good has almost made him, I don't want to say not marketable, but they're not there. They're not available.
Because it's not competitive,
exactly.
too?
You end up with Silva's fights that everyone was hating on.
Eventually, though, when somebody does beat them,
it's a big deal.
They're going to be they're going to make an instant star.
Yeah, it's definitely good to have strong champions, not paper champions or questionable champions. And with the champions that they have now, it's here's them and number 2 is down here. And even the number 2, 3 guys, say for example in the welterweight division, Fitch and Koscheck, they've already lost to GSP. So they're claiming for a title shot when they already got beat by the champ. So that's when you might have to start having 2 camps fight each other. But they could turn it around and make the competition look good for the contenders.
That's why you have Vitor Belfort being the next challenger, because Nate Marquardt's had his shot before.
So has Henderson.
So has Henderson.
Henderson walked.
Exactly. So they put Belfort there because at least it's something fresh.
But he beat Rich Franklin. How many times have we seen Rich Franklin beaten to death by Anderson Silva?
At the same time, this also could go for a match for GSP and Anderson Silva. Hopefully,
they wanted to do that.
We still want to do it, but GSP wants to go about it the right way because he walks around at about 185. So you wouldn't want to be fighting a 200-plus pound Anderson Silva.
At a certain point, they just might have to move. Even if they don't fight each other, these guys might just have to move up. Anderson Silva's shown that he can hang with the light heavyweights. GSP could move up to middleweight. So there is that. We could see some new matchups from there.
Dream matches.
Yeah.
Yeah, some good catchweight fights, too.
And there's a question of what GSP is going to do as far as the Olympics.
Well, that's getting into the next decade. We're sticking to what happened in 2009. And one of the things that was a big topic was, speaking of champions, when Brock Lesnar beat Frank Mir at 100, what's the fight everyone wanted to see? him and Fedor. Fedor was a big topic this year, and of course he signed with Strikeforce, who has grown exponentially, it would seem, this year, taking Elite XC's spot as the CBS darling for representing MMA to the mainstream. So we got Strikeforce doing that, who's also showcasing women's MMA with the big Cyborg and Carano fight, which I think made strides, if not maybe cut down the potential matches because there's not exactly a huge depth
Women's
of
pool, yeah.
Correct. But also WEC did pretty well in Zuffa. They had a lot of breakout stars this year, a lot of big fights. It seems like MMA has been growing, and you are seeing it in the newspaper now. You are seeing MMA guys in movies.
You are seeing it at ESPN more too.
With all these champions hurt, UFC should have stepped up and maybe showcased some of these guys this year. You had like Miguel Torres, Mike Brown, Uriah Faber. These guys could be stars.
It's all about getting them away from versus. Not like
Yeah.
people have versus. This year, UFC is going to versus, putting a sick card on versus. How about putting WC on Spike?
A guy like Mike Brown probably weighs about 145. That's what Pacquiao weighs. And Pacquiao's on pay-per-view. I don't see why they
Well,
can't.
it's two different sports.
I'd argue that Faber is a star. He is WEC's
Yeah.
only
He is
star.
He's their
star,
Chuck Liddell.
But they're
And-
still not
no.
getting millions of
No, I mean,
watchers.
Strikeforce is still outdoing them completely. I mean, the only time that WEC has been up there with their ratings has been when Faber's last fight and Faber's comeback fight. Other than that, Strikeforce has beaten them pretty handedly with the Carano fight, with the most recent show.
The Kung Lee fight.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of fights, we want to get to Fight of the Year. There's a lot to choose from. There are a lot of great fights this year, but what stands out to you as Fight of the Year for 2009?
I think when Ronda from the Jersey Shore really took the guy from the boardwalk and had a great ground and pound, he mounted him, got on top of him, and then Mike's situation helped out. But anyway, Fight of the Year, I'm going to have to go with The Natural versus Big Nog. These two really went back and forth, really showed that they really, in their age and their experience in MMA, can still go. Randy was hurt a couple times, almost got submitted, but just a great back and forth battle.
August was an important month for UFC too, because a lot of these questions were raised about 100 and where they go from there. And 101 and 102 had some awesome performances, at least in the main matches. The fall pretty much fell. It was a pretty flat few months for UFC, but at 102, Nogueira Couture was one of the best matches I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Clay Guida and Diego. That was a war. And
At the Ultimate Finale 9.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was
That was a
without a
complete
doubt, that was the best of the year.
war. And seeing Guida get kicked in the head like that,
And then come right back up.
and then boom. He's a warrior. He might not win everything, but every fight you see with him in it, he puts it all on the line.
And especially with that hair, it looked like some sort of primal,
Exactly.
bloody caveman
That,
fight.
for me, that was my fight of the year. Close to the Henderson-Donald Cerrone fight in WBC, but that was my favorite.
That's my favorite too. My other favorite was Anderson Silva versus Forrest Griffin. Just 'cause I can just keep watching that
It was
fight
great. It was
over
enjoyable.
and over again. That's what you want to see when Anderson Silva comes out. You want to see him just destroy somebody.
Certainly made up for the previous.
Yeah,
Anderson
that 5
Silva
rounds
Yeah,
of
the two.
playing around.
Yeah.
The beast has been awoken.
Well, the Talis Lightis fight before that, you were on the phone doing play-by-play for me live and said it was one of the worst fights you've ever seen.
Oh, yeah.
And going into this, we all know what Anderson Silva's capable of, and it seemed he's gotten complacent recently with his last couple fights because no one's competitive. He's a league above them. He's a big step above them. Forrest Griffin, I don't think he could afford to get lazy with, and I knew in my heart that the old Anderson Silva was going to come out for this fight.
I disagree. I don't think it's him being complacent. I think Talis Lightis really just refused to engage with him. Forrest is the one moving forward, which Anderson Silva can be a counter striker too, as well as he can be aggressive. But Lightis just kept going to the ground. Whenever any sort of striker would go on, he just fall on his back.
He's scared to get hit by
You,
it, dude.
Yeah.
I
don't
still
blame him.
I still think the spider could have pounced on his prey and finished him off if he truly chose to. And that's what happened in that fight.
yeah.
Let me tell you how electric it was in the arena
Yeah.
because he came into this massive heel heat and I knew that was going to happen. I said, fine, watch him prove how good he could be, and he did. And it was like watching a master painter perform on a canvas a masterwork. It was just great seeing that. But he's a master. That could qualify possibly as Fighter of the Year. Probably not for him this year. But who do you think would be Fighter of the Year?
GSP. Two very tough fights. Probably his toughest fights to date. He had a new BJ Penn, someone who dominated at lightweight, as he showed the rest of the year. It started off the year with that huge match, and GSP completely just showed him who's the boss. And then you had Thiago Alves, who was dominating welterweight, beat Koscheck, Hughes, Caro, and almost finished Koscheck. And people really thought that GSP was going to have trouble on the feet. Koscheck, All-American wrestler, could not take Thiago Alves down. And GSP just took him down at will, beat him the championship rounds with a hurt groin. GSP is my pick.
I couldn't come up with just one.
Well, give us one.
Jose Aldo.
It
just
may be
a
different.
heck of a year coming up to him beating Mike Brown.
Yeah, he had
And
4-0 this year,
4-0.
and people are calling him the Anderson
And
Silva.
he's what, 21?
Yeah, he's
Super
young. He's young.
He's still got a
He's going to give Faber some trouble.
great career ahead of him, and he had a heck of a year. Great build-up to beating Mike Brown.
Well, he fought 4 fights this year, won them all, and it was amazing seeing him win the featherweight title so convincingly over Mike Brown, who just went through that war with Uriah Faber, which was also a great fight. People were calling him the Anderson Silva of the featherweight division, and it's hard not to make that comparison.
I got to go with George St. Pierre also. There's nobody's going to stop him in the near future. To be able to go 5 rounds with a torn groin
Against a guy like
against a guy
Alves.
like that, like you said, Koscheck couldn't handle it. St. Pierre with a torn groin was able to keep this guy down.
It's not like Alves was tired either.
No.
5th round, he kept going. He,
kept
showed
going.
his great cardio that match.
Well, a lot of people probably would have said Lyoto Machida before that last fight with Shogun Rua as well, but one name not brought up yet either was Fedor Emelianenko. Fedor's got a lot of haters out there, and I know that, and he may not have fought as many times as Jose Aldo. A lot of these guys haven't either. But Fedor kept the streak going of unbelievably dominant heavyweight knockouts within the first or second round of his fights, and he's pretty much really undefeated still, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But another great year for Fedor Emelianenko and a great year for the Wrestling Roundtable, but we're going to move on to the year in wrestling 2009.
Still, like, shit we didn't cover. That should be like a 2-segment.
I know we went way over.
If we had a
Kimbo
right
covering the
minutes.
UFC,
Yeah,
Affliction
Kimbo,
going
there was
down,
like a knockout of the
Tito
year.
resigning.
Yeah, Fedor would win.
Yeah, I
think Henderson over Bismarck.
I even skipped
so?
over.
Yeah.
I even skipped over the Kimbo topic
Yeah.
because we were talking so much.
I like what you're known for Kimbo, but if he continues to suck, will he stay in ratings?
Welcome back to the Wrestling Roundtable. We were talking about mixed martial arts year in review for 2009, and we're going to move on to pro wrestling, so let's bring another pro wrestler on board. It's Alex Payne, and we're going to talk about some of the major stories in professional wrestling to start it off. Obviously, towards the end, the big one, TNA signed Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff, and Hogan supposedly got a 1-year deal with options. Do you think this is going to be the growth for TNA? So far, Hogan's one show on TV, he's spiked the ratings to the biggest they've ever had.
They've got 2 million viewers in the first Monday night show. If they keep riding it out like they did Thursday, they got like a 1.3 or something like that. If they're able to continue that out and they're able to hopefully turn around and bring in new viewers and put on the right wrestling show, and that being the word, a wrestling show for people to watch, potentially by the end of the year they could actually pull something out and they might actually be somewhat of a threat.
Like I wrote in the column for the website, this is it for TNA. They've got everything that they've asked for, and it still has done enough for the numbers. Now they got the biggest name in wrestling playing as their commissioner or whatever he's doing. This is their rebranding. This is it. They need to really sit back and say, what can we do to compete with WWE? Monday night is the only option.
But they can't be bringing in the friends. You can put Hogan on there, that's the obvious draw. Hogan, just the interest alone is going to probably help them out. If they can do the Cactus Jack match,
And
that
the
can really
Outsiders.
pull them off. And maybe the Outsiders too, because at least it's something people do want to see. But Nasties, I don't believe.
Well, interest is something WWE's tried drumming up with their celebrity guest hosts for Saturday Night Live. I mean, Raw. What do you guys think of this concept? It's lasted all year practically, and it's probably going to go through till WrestleMania.
It's awful. Just get rid of this already. The only people that have even been decent were former wrestlers. Jeremy Piven can't even get your pay-per-view name right. All this crap.
It's embarrassing.
It
You're
is
supposed to
embarrassing.
be
It
putting
shows
on
they don't
a-
want to be there.
Just put on a show that your wrestling fans, your fans, your universe, what do you want to call them, they don't have to be embarrassed about watching. When your guest host, your commissioner, or whatever you're going to call them for the night, comes in and can't get the names of your wrestlers correct, the matches that you're supposed to be selling for the pay-per-view properly, and you can't sell the event properly for your fans that are supposed to be familiar with your show, and they have to turn around and they go, hey, I just watched wrestling last night and it was awful. You're embarrassing your own fan, and they're going to be turned off from it more than anybody else.
Yeah, but in their eyes, as long as they get their 5 seconds on ESPN, their 5
they don't
seconds
get it all
on
the
E.
time.
But if they get it, they got it with Shaq, they got it with Cuban. They,
Look at it
they'll
this
get
way,
with
though.
Ben Roethlisberger.
This fall, they ran Madison Square Garden. They're on an NBC-owned station. What was the best they can get as a host? Roddy Piper. It's the middle of November sweeps. You couldn't get anybody from an NBC program to come on here. Anything.
The only one that worked was Bret Hart.
Well, speaking of Madison Square Garden, the rumor is that UFC is going to be on the verge of breaking into Madison Square Garden. Shane McMahon was going to a lot of UFC lately, and I wanted to bring him up because it could be a significant story itself. The McMahons, actually on the payroll for WWE, have been cut in half in 2009, not counting Triple H, of course. But Linda McMahon left her official position to run for the Senate in Connecticut. Shane McMahon left on his own accord to pursue other options. And of course, he meets with UFC. People start talking immediately. Do you think that the McMahons are going to be a story in the next year? What are they going to do? Is Shane going to do something that might go head-to-head with WWE, even in an indirect
UFC's
way?
not competition, remember?
It's possible. The McMahons, if they're able to be in politics, get into other forms of sports and entertainment, I guess, there could be more McMahon mentioned throughout the media besides in their pro wrestling. If Shane can actually get in with UFC, which he's trying his best to, or I heard recently he's trying to get in with Strikeforce. So if he can get into some sort of MMA organization and help them out, there could be some butting heads soon. It could make for some interesting news.
I think with Linda, the whole politics thing, she can make some headlines, but she's going to be scrutinized for her background. You know how cutthroat politics are. And when you're involved in a business filled with young deaths and drugs and everything like that, I don't see any future for her.
Well, speaking of deaths, one of the things you do when you go through year in review is look back at who's gone from this year. And there were some drug-related deaths, unfortunately. The big one, however, was Mitsuharu Misawa, who we've talked about on the show, especially when we did Best and Worst of Puroresu or Puroresu in general. And for those who are unfamiliar with Mitsuharu Misawa, to put it in terms that you might get, it'd be like if Ric Flair got dropped on his neck and broke his spine and died in the middle of a wrestling ring. He was a huge name in Japan for over 20 years and was the mainstay of Pro Wrestling Noah as their president. So it was a big, important event in Japan. Noah's, of course, moved on since then. But domestically here in America, Dr. Death, Steve Williams, just died, unfortunately. I was a big fan of Dr. Death. I met him a couple years ago in San Francisco, and it's sad to see that his battle with cancer ended that way. But the younger deaths were Umaga and Test. Names who were just wrestling on prominent shows.
A year ago.
Yeah, a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Umaga was wrestling until this summer.
And it's just a shame that WWE didn't even really acknowledge it.
Well, Linda's running for Senate. If that comes out...
But they can mention Dr. Death.
Well, it wasn't drug-related.
Yeah, he died of cancer. You can't help cancer necessarily. They have no control over that.
But them not mentioning it at all isn't going to hide the fact that it happened.
Regardless of all that, we're going to move on to Match of the Year. Who do you think had Match of the Year for 2009 in professional wrestling?
I'm going to say Shawn Michaels and Undertaker, WrestleMania 25. Obvious choice, obvious answer.
Well, I don't agree. I know everyone loves that match. It's 5 stars. WWE officially agrees with everybody as well. It was the greatest thing they've ever seen, and I disagree for 2 reasons. One, the first half was pretty boring, and it had a crossface, but you know, that whole thing. Secondly, it was a great match. I don't want to take away from it in that respect, but I don't even think that's the best match that happened in Texas that weekend. That would be Davey Richards and Kenta at Ring of Honor's Supercard of Honor, but that's my opinion. However, for WWE, I think Match of the Year would definitely have to be Rey Mysterio Jr. and Chris Jericho at the Bash for the Intercontinental title. Those two had such good, incredible matches for WWE this year, and that one was good from start to finish. Probably the best one they had.
Davey Richards and Bryan Danielson on Bryan's second to last night. In
The
Ring of
Final
Honor.
Countdown tour in Boston.
I thought it was great. It was an intense fight. A match that Ring of Honor hadn't done. I was watching it in the back with some of my friends watching the matches. The match itself was just amazing. A real fighters wrestling match should be. I sat in the crowd just to listen to the fans reacting. It's great. If you have the chance to actually watch this match, sit back and enjoy it. Go ahead, Eric.
Do you think that match, in a way, was kind of a passing of the torch? Because Davey Richards
without
is
a
the
doubt.
new darling.
No, everyone thought this year was Davey's year. This was definitely Bryan's way of passing the torch to Davey, and Davey hopefully taking the torch and going from there with Ring of Honor.
Who do you think was Wrestler of the Year for 2009?
Jericho.
Chris Jericho?
Chris Jericho, no doubt. He had a great year from starting on Raw, then he went to Mysterio on SmackDown, the tag team with Big Show. It was just a great year for him all around.
Rey Mysterio. He also had the matches with Jericho, but he was able to go from Dolph Ziggler and put on a great Intercontinental title match with someone that most people would say was a lesser opponent. And I thought he pulled it off with him and those other guys.
Rey Mysterio's pretty much been their MVP of the year, I think. Not even just on pay-per-view, but on television. Even when he got suspended and he had that last match before the suspension where he dropped the Intercontinental
that
to
was
Morrison.
great also.
Got a lot of TV time. Always came out with a great match no matter the opponent. But I think if you follow wrestling closer than just what's on TV, if you look at the independents, even maybe some foreign stuff, I think it'd be hard to say anybody else but Davey Richards.
Rey Mysterio. Intercontinental title run, and then later in the year, showing he can hang with the big guys with Taker and Batista. MVP goes to Rey Mysterio. I wish I could one day say MVP or Jack Swagger, but hey, I'm still waiting for that. I'm still waiting for it.
Or MVP is MVP.
Yes, please.
But that was the past year in wrestling, and we're going to move on to the past 10. When we come back, the decade in review.
On February 6th at the Las Vegas Hilton, don't miss Total Extreme Comedy starring New York Times bestseller and multi-time World Wrestling Champion Mick Foley.
I have a secret weapon because I'm gonna talk about my tonight.
Joining Mick on this night of pro wrestling comedy are brother Bruce Pritchard and Colt Boom Boom Cabana.
Jim Ross is doing play-by-play to my porn.
Proceeds from this event will benefit the Nevada chapter of Best Buddies.